Hey y'all, it's Brigitte Cutshaw with Real Things Living. Today, my guest is Vicki Goodman. She is an author, a singer, a violinist, and she now likes to view life with a more optimistic outlook. Can you see hi, Vicki?
Hi, and
I
thank you for having me, Bridget. I'm so honored.
I think this is a great story you have to share. It starts off kind of in a way, I should say sad, but you're taking lessons that you learned. And I guess my first question for you is what prompted you to be an author? You probably, I know you maybe had a background in writing, but what prompted you to be a writer and create a book, write a book?
Yeah, well, for one thing, it wasn't as hard as it might be for some people because you're right. I had a background in as a theater critic on the side. I'm actually a mechanical engineer, retired now, but on the side, for over 20 years, I wrote theater reviews for a local paper in Long Beach, California, which is where I was living at the time. What prompted me to write the book was that my husband Sam passed from cancer in 2019. And I thought I would be lost for a good long time. Even though I am kind of a survivor type, I did not know what to do about the thought of life without Sam. But very soon after he passed, I was flooded with optimism and opportunities started coming my way that I felt motivated to embrace. Sorry about that. And I did a lot of things that were new for me and fun and interesting and productive. And the other thing is serendipitous events started happening, too many to chalk up to happenstance. But I think the most important thing of all that began happening after Sam died was that I was blessed with clarity and insights and revelations that seem to be coming from outside of myself. And all of this put together after 2 years from the time he died just seemed like such an uplifting story that could help other people. So I had to write the book.
I think that is a beautiful tribute to him as well. Definitely. So my question is, I just have to ask, what kind of cancer did he have? Because you mentioned he passed away from that.
Yeah, he had liver cancer, which is seldom diagnosed in the early
Oh,
stages.
mm,
So, it was pretty advanced and had already spread to the pancreas when it was diagnosed. There were no symptoms.
wow.
So, yeah.
That I just got the chills, sorry, when you were saying it, because that is a tough thing, is you don't, it's so advanced at that point. But I believe it's still beautiful that you tried to look at the positive out of his situation. And I'm sure he would love the idea, or him knowing if he could, that you wrote this book about him. And so what makes, I guess, your book, his tribute, I know you got inspired by the grief. What makes your unique experience, I guess? Because so many people have
Okay.
dealt with cancer. Does that make sense? So,
Oh, yeah. Actually, my experience and what makes it unique has more to do with the insights I received about the real nature of loss and death. Now, this is all the more stunning because I was raised in a secular family. No one believed in God or an afterlife. And even though before Sam died, I had begun to sort of develop a rudimentary belief in a higher power, I hadn't taken that very far. But after Sam died, I really wanted to know if he was there and if so, where he was. And I started asking questions of a hospice chaplain that was available to me for some months after he died. I don't even like using the word died because I believe he passed into another
correct,
existence. I
right.
believe the body dies, but the soul lives on. So I was asking the hospice chaplain about the afterlife, and she recommended a story to me that I read about the near-death experience of a neurosurgeon. And this story, given that he was secular and given that he knows so well, being a neurosurgeon, the capabilities of the brain when under siege from such a massive infection that put him in his 7-day coma, given all of that, I found his story to be so convincing. And believe it or not, it took me the rest of the way to fully believing in God and an afterlife. And so that it prepared me for the revelations that came afterwards about the fact that death does not kill the soul, it just kills the body. And what that means in terms of whether we really want to go on believing what our culture conditions us to believe, that death is a terrible, tragic thing. I no longer believe it is. I think there's definitely a transition there. There's even a reason to grieve because your life is really changing at the point where you lose, your spouse, especially, but anyone, the death of a child. So began to think a lot about God's plan for us and how everything that seems to have happened to me in my life that I thought was so terrible was really a way to teach me certain lessons. So my entire view of everything began to change. And I believe that the message I now have from all of these revelations and insights and from the clarity that ensued has a huge potential to maybe even start a movement if I can get it off, if I can keep it moving from here so that people don't have to suffer the way they do when someone they love transitions to the afterlife.
Gives them right, you're sharing a different perspective about it. And I learned a lot after my stepfather passed away unexpectedly. And we're like, the stuff I reflected on what I learned from him, and I'm sure you definitely reflected a lot on what you learned from your husband. And I believe I like the idea of the soul and the spirit. What can you explain what the difference is between soul and spirit? I'm just I'm just
I
curious.
don't think there
Okay.
I don't think there is a difference. I think the soul and the spirit are the same thing. If you have a different take on that, I'd love to hear
No, I was
it.
just wondering because I've heard people using it differently, and that's why I believe that the same to me, I think your spirit maybe it is you. It's inside of you, right? And then maybe, like you said, your soul is very similar, but maybe your soul is when it's no longer in the physical body, maybe. I'm just kind of making that up, but it just makes sense to me. This your spirit is your aura, kind of, and your maybe but people I get vibes when I'm around people, right? Is that your I'm thinking that is your spirit, right? The vibes.
Yeah, it's a good way of looking at it. That sounds reasonable to me because, one of the things, and don't get me wrong, I don't think any of this came from within me. I think I was chosen as the messenger, maybe because of my secular background. Maybe
Right.
God thought, okay, this is a woman who could convince people. She speaks fairly well, she writes well, and she started out, never believing in God until much later in life. So, I think that all of these concepts came from outside myself, and I am simply the messenger. And I do believe that the soul does not experience negative emotions. And
Right.
that's one of the things that I want to impart to people because so many people after their loved one passes, they feel guilty moving on. Or they feel that what if they have a new relationship and they think, oh my gosh, I can't have a sexual relationship because what if my deceased husband's soul is watching? Well, I believe the soul is watching everything you do. However, I also believe that there are no negative emotions
They want to be
once the brain has died. I think, there is no jealousy, there's no anger, there's none of that. all this person wants from having loved you and still loving you wants for you to be happy and move on until you can join them in the afterlife.
Right. It's a I like the concept of what you're saying. You're still here on this earth, and but your husband, his body's not here, but his soul is there around you. I believe in that. I really kind of do, just because, like I mentioned with my stepfather's situation. And it also, as you're talking, have you heard of a television series called The Good Place? Um,
No.
it's kind of reminds me of that, where you should check it out. It's kind of a comedy thing, but these people, based on your soul, after your body goes away, you have to go. The good place is like heaven, and the bad place is, you know, if you're being bad, making bad decisions on earth. And so this woman accidentally gets sent to the good place when she was like not kind to people on earth, but she learns she can change. She got better being, but it's kind of comical. But it just made me think of that, because yeah, your soul doesn't die. I don't think it does. But they made it funny based on she wasn't kind when she was on earth, but they accidentally got sent to what's called the good place, living, different things up there.
Well, even the name is funny. I mean, the good place and the bad place
Yes,
when,
it's
we
funny.
both know. Yeah.
I think I watched it during COVID. Were doing, I didn't really watch much TV, but I like to learn and about stuff like that. I like comedy. I think we learn from different things, and I like the sarcasm and the comedy aspect. That's how I like to learn. And I'm so grateful that you're sharing your story, because you're being vulnerable, right? I think that's important. It's helping you heal from, the situation with your husband. And I'm, like you said, grief, people talk about grief so much and they make it very negative, right? And
Yeah. Well, one funny thing, let me tell you this, Bridget, is that when I mention all of this to people I know, they nod knowingly. And I'm thinking, if people already know this, then that's how powerful this cultural conditioning is to still make us awfulize death and loss. Because if people know, then it's just a matter of them being unwilling to make the connection, like to connect the dots
yeah,
from sheer logic of, okay, if there's God in an afterlife and the afterlife is the most beautiful place imaginable, and then why are we grieving hard? Why is death so terrible? So people aren't making the connection, I think, because the conditioning is that
right.
powerful.
That's what we've been taught in a way in our environment. And it is the thought, it is a drastic change. That's part of it. And you do have to acknowledge your spouse is no, or whoever you love is no longer there. But I'm totally in with the focusing on the good takeaway from it. And I just think that helps you deal with change in life. Helps. I mean, that's obviously you do too, and that's why you wrote this book. Change. I think you have to acknowledge something, but then move on to help you go forward. And your husband. So I'm just curious. Did he wasn't? Were he same as you? Was he secular? Same as you?
We had very similar upbringings in
Okay.
largely secular Jewish homes on opposite coasts. I,
Okay.
I grew up in Southern California, and he's from Brooklyn, New York.
Okay.
But the families were kind of similar. And my dad's from Brooklyn, New York,
Oh,
so yeah. Yeah. Now, I'd say there was a little more of a belief system in Sam's family than my own.
wow. Okay. I was
Yeah.
just curious how that was, and he's still probably happy. I think his soul is happy. You're sharing this positivity, and I like that. Again, you're focusing on the positive, which is so important. And before we got on the call, you mentioned that you played the violin since you were 7, but you started
Mhm.
singing recently. So I'm thinking you're using art a little bit too as part of the healing process, right?
Well, there hasn't been much to heal. That's
Oh,
kind of
okay.
my
That's good.
message here,
Okay.
Okay, on the day Sam died or passed, I was flooded with optimism. I mean, I cried my eyes out when I first saw his body laying there lifeless, which was expected. He was declining for the last month or so at the very least. But it just seemed so unseemly to me. Where's this optimism coming from? Why am I kind of seeing figurative sunlight coming through on what I thought would be the cloudiest day of my life? What is going on? And the inclination was to push it away because, it was unseemly. And then I thought to myself, I took good care of Sam. It was a loving relationship to the last. He never had to worry about anything. I took care of it all. And I was strong during his illness. And maybe if good things are trying to come my way, even on the day he passes, maybe I should let them come. I wasn't sure, but I made a conscious decision to just let things happen. And I'm kind of a control freak. So thinking back on all this,
Gonna nip it
thinking
here.
back on it, I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty amazing that I even made that decision. But anyway, I did. And all of the rest that I've already started to describe happened. It followed.
I was also thinking too, in a way it helped that his cancer wasn't, I mean, you knew about it for a while, so that probably helped your soul prepare for this rather than
Absolutely.
a sudden death. And I would rather, um, when I pass away or my husband's, I say pass away rather than die, um, is to have it to be extended like that. If you're gonna, rather than boom, that kind of thing. That is shocking, right? And I
Yes,
think that's what happened like with our stepfather, who's like had a heart attack at home, boom, he was gone. And we're like, what? Right? And so, but then what was so cool about, I should say cool, sorry, the good about that experience is, we looked and learned even more about him. And and he he's from that generation where they keep a lot to themselves. I think you're as well. My generation too. We didn't share things publicly much.
yeah,
But he was so funny, and I'm sure your husband probably had a great sense of humor. I
he
think
did.
that I could just picking it up from the vibe that you're talking to me. I'm like, I think he had probably a really good. He's in there with your his soul's there. That had a good funny vibe, and especially he was very supportive of you. Like you are a theater critic, and did he go to the theater with you, or did you go by yourself?
Well, for
Awesome.
the first couple of years, he went with me all the time. And then, I mean, this went on for over 20 years, my theater
Wow.
reviewing. After the first couple of years, he sort of sheepishly said, "Sweetie, do you think maybe you can get your friend Cheryl to go or something?" And I said, "Oh, you don't feel like going tonight?" And but it gradually dawned on me that he was just theatered out. Now, one thing that was very funny about that was if someone at the community theater said, "Oh, I can't wait to see Sam," because he was hysterically funny. Everybody loved him. And he was such a nice man. And so and I'd say, "Sweetie, Gigi said she can't wait to see you. And I told her you probably wouldn't be coming." And he said, "Oh, I'll come." If some said they hoped to see Sam there, all of that being theatered out went out the window and he'd come.
He was the
So
show.
that was, yeah, I mean, he loved that. Oh, Gigi
I
wants to see me. Okay, I'll go.
well, that just I think that just his legacy. I've just what you're saying to me, just the vibe. He had a great legacy, and you have this beautiful book you wrote, how you were healed. I should say healed. You didn't use the word survive in the book. I know it's part of the title, but you're really thriving now. It's kind of how I like to use that. And you have found more optimism, which is definitely not in our culture. Everybody makes it so focused on the grieving part when you need to focus on the good of what that person did while they were here to you and the environment, not the environment, but community is a better word. So I have another question. So What do you think are like the best insights you got other than just the anything other than focusing on the optimism after someone passes? Just curious.
Well, I've talked about some of them a little bit, like
Mhm.
the fact that I was blessed with this clarity on death and loss and how we awfulize the two. Even people who believe in a beautiful afterlife and that it's not a terrible place to go, which also assumes that they believe that the soul lives on after the body dies.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so I put it all together. Maybe because I'm an engineer, I never thought of that before, but maybe the way I think so logically and analytically is what drove me to take these insights and put it together and say, wait a minute, I'm connecting the dots. Why does it seem no one else does? So that was, I think, one of the most important insights. And then how I'm I'm making a big assumption here, but I'm almost certain it's got to be true that the brain is what gives us these negative emotions like
Uh,
fear and anger and jealousy. They can't possibly exist in the afterlife, not from what I've read of various near-death experiences, like the one from the neurosurgeon.
that's
So,
interesting.
yeah, which means all a soul of someone who loved us wants is for us to be happy until we can join them. Nothing else makes any sense to me anyway.
Right. We're here, it also helps you, I think, figure out you're focusing on your purpose, right?
Yeah.
That's what it is to help, and that's how others can benefit from your experience. You're, yeah, is that right?
Well, yeah, and I've experienced such growth from all this because, and I'm going to say something a little self-deprecating here, but because of the way I was raised, some issues with my mom and that we won't go into, I spent most of my life being kind of on the self-involved side, not really someone who gives back
Hmm.
too much. I'm a nice person, but not a real giving person and certainly not selfless. And so this is a chance for me to really find a way to try and make a difference in the world outside of myself. And that's new. And I think Sam would be very proud of that. And one thing that was overwhelming for me after he passed was I wanted to make him proud of me. My impatience was always my worst character trait. I'm a bit of a type A, and my second book is about type A
Okay.
personalities, incidentally. And that's coming. It's not finished yet. But I wanted him to be proud of me, and I wanted to finally, once and for all, get rid of my worst character flaw, which was my impatience. Well, I now know I will never get rid of it completely, but boy, it is 80% improved at least. And I know that he would love that, that he does love that.
I think that's beautiful. Right. I like that you're fixing your flaws. Is that the right word? You're kind of
Yeah,
is that I don't know if I said that correctly, but yeah, that's kind of how I see it. We all have some flaws, but you're not beating yourself up over it, and you know your husband would be proud. I just love stories like this. And you did mention you have a second book, and it's about being type A. Is it about mean going too fast in life or
oh
staying in
yeah.
the right lane? Is that what it's about? Or
Oh, okay. So, given what you've said, you've almost got the title in what you just said. The title is Speed Bumps and Other Impediments to Life in the Fast Lane. And it's self-deprecating in places. I make a lot of fun of myself, which I enjoy doing, and it's funny in places. And the reason I'm writing it is because I think, okay, type A's need something to identify with. They beat themselves up a lot over the way they are, the way they can't seem to help themselves being the way they are. And knowing that there are so many others like them out there, at least one who's writing this book, will be good because they'll be able to laugh at themselves when they read the things in my book. And I also think type Bs who have type As in their lives will understand their type As better after reading the book. So I think the book's for everyone.
I really like this idea that you just got so much knowledge and you're just shining a light on what we need to see, right? or it has been like suppressed a little bit. People just try to hide things,
Hmm.
and you're making people feel better about themselves. Like you said, this second book, you're going to understand the type A's a little bit better. And I think I don't what prompt I guess because again, your background is in engineering. Is that connected to that as well? I'm thinking being a type A. I was just curious.
I don't think so. I've known a lot of type B engineers, I maybe others would disagree, but I don't see a connection between the type A aspect and the analytical math and science
Right.
oriented engineer thing.
There's some people
Yeah,
that do both. That's why I was just curious. Um I'm one of the I'm kind of in between. That's kind of why you're saying I'm one of those in between people.
you're so healthy.
Right. I'm an A and a B. Well, I'm probably more, it just depends on the situation. I think that's what comes out of us, depending on the
Yeah,
situation.
yeah.
And I think you're glowing, and I love the story that you're sharing. And I recommend your book. It's To Sam with Love, a surviving spouse's story of inspired grief. That was very brave of you to put it out there.
I
And
disagree.
you disagree? It's not brave?
I disagree, Bridget. Um,
Okay, that's
I
fine.
have always, okay, I've always been an open book. I like talking about myself. I like making fun of myself. I even like telling people about the worst of the worst. I think it makes me feel less guilty about my flaws to do that. So for me, it wasn't a big stretch to expose all of this. I couldn't
Right.
wait to do it. And the fact that I love to sit down at the computer and write, made it easier
That's a great
too.
skill set, and you're listening to your instincts. I just know some people who are terrified, right? That's why I was saying that. So many people who want to write books aren't doing it. And I hope this inspires them to do this because we learn so much from each other's. And I like books. I learn more from a book. I mean, I like TV sometimes, like I mentioned the good, but I like the book aspect for some reason. I think you can interpret it a little bit differently, right? As you read
Mhm.
it, person
Yeah.
maybe. Am I wrong? That's just kind of how I see things, because it's based on our experience. And
You mean that a book is easier to interpret
I think
than,
for each individual, whereas a movie, it's going to be more from a director's perspective, right? That's kind
good
of how
point.
that's how I see it, and that's why we're going to interpret. Um, Well, your book is a nonfiction book, so we're not going to interpret it differently than something fiction, I don't think. But it's still beautiful, and love the humor. Humor is so important in life.
There's
I
even humor into Sam with Love.
I love that.
It's a very uplifting book. You'd think that the book would be very serious. And the middle section that describes Sam's diagnosis, treatment, and ultimate passing is more serious. But the rest of the book is, but not depressingly so. And the
Right.
rest of the book, the first part where I describe our lives together a little bit so that people can understand who Sam was and a little bit of who I am. And the part after he passes, which is roughly the latter third of the book, where I experienced all of these things that were the reason I wrote the book, they're very uplifting, and there are places where I injected humor into it. I tell all about Sam's jokes. I give a lot of examples in the
That's
first
awesome.
third of the book on that because he was so funny and it was a big part of our life together. So, I included some of that too. And, I've been told that it's a really fun read. And I, I mean, I was just so grateful that I was able to communicate this story in such a way that people are finding it to be what some have described as a page turner.
I like that.
Wow.
That's definitely it's a book that people weren't expecting to have humor in it, and I think I mentioned a couple times, I just love humor. Humor helps you get through things as well, helps you deal with life. Every situation is different, and I love the story that you're sharing. Everybody is
Thank
probably
you.
who's listening, they're going to want to get this because if they like humor, especially, they're going to want to go get this book. So where can people learn more about you, Vicki? Where can they find you?
Well, I have an author site where I have some blog articles too on various subjects, and that's Vicki, Vicki, Paris, like the city in France, Goodman, VickiParisGoodman.com. And then I have discounted the book at another domain that I have, which is called inspiredgrief.com. And the discounted access to the book is at inspiredgrief.com/book. The other thing I'd like to offer to you is my 3 audio episodes. They're about 12 to 15 minutes each, but they are packed with the insights and revelations that I received after publishing the book. The ones on death and loss, I go into much more depth on those concepts. These are you must subscribe to these. It's free at inspiredgrief.com. All you have to do is put in your first name and your email address, and you'll have subscribed to the 3 episode audio series. So get the audio series. You will love what I have to say in those.
I think that's awesome, especially here in the audio version, getting 3 chapters. That is so cool that you're doing
Yeah,
that.
in fact, Bridget, I I kind of consider the book and the audio
Okay.
episodes together to be sort of a toolkit
Ah,
because the audio episodes have some of the best of the insights and revelations. And the book is more of an example of how one woman moved forward after losing the love of her life, but didn't really lose him.
right.
But life really changed, obviously. And and that is a spectacular example of how someone can move forward into the next chapter of life happily and productively and have it happen very soon after the passing of of their loved one.
I think that is awesome. It's a good, like you mentioned, toolkit to help people understand that they can get through this too. We're all going to
Oh,
have
absolutely.
death is always going to be here. And I shouldn't, but it is, it's part of life. And so we need to know how to manage it or handle it better. And you're doing it the right way with the optimistic outlook, excuse me. And I really appreciate your time, Vicki. And for those that are listening, those links you mentioned, they will be in the description part of the podcast episode. Thank you again, Vicki.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, Bridget.
Awesome. Thank you again.